Welcome to the Mosto Fitness Podcast. Today, in episode 6, we are going to talk about race day breakfast. We do not enter the track with an empty tank in our bike, and we don't want to enter the track with an empty tank in our stomach. We want to be fueled up. So, this is a quick hit podcast where we keep them short and to the point, focusing on things you can do off the bike to race faster and safer. At Mosto Fitness, we work with racers remotely in the real world. Many have a life full of commitments, don't have a lot of time to train on the bike or ride. We provide training off the bike, so ride days, whether racing, riding, or training, will be faster and safer. So yeah, we're going to talk all about that race day breakfast today. Now, first, I'll start with me. Way back before I went to school for exercise science, before I really understood the body, and definitely before there was a lot of good information out there, my race days started the same. I would, on the way to the track, have a burrito that I pre-made the night before. This burrito would consist of a tortilla shell, meat, and cheese, maybe like some onions and green peppers. So really quite heavy if we think about it. Meat is slow to digest. Cheese is slow to digest. The tortilla is probably about the only thing that was doing any good for me. So we'll go in deeper about what type of fuel is ideal here in a minute. But I will just say that was not the ideal fuel for when we are out there racing a high heart rate and we want to get the most out of our body and out of our muscles. So this breakfast I was having kind of forced it down. Have usually 2 of these decent sized burritos a couple hours before I raced. And then, especially on warm days, I was starting to have like a lot of GI issues. Like my stomach would just cramp and hurt so much. And I was racing hare scrambles, enduro, GNCC, that type of stuff. So longer races. So then during the race, my stomach's cramping. I just could not get any fluid down. I wouldn't drink out of my hydrator at the pit stop. It's supposed to have like a gel, 100 calories of simple carbs essentially, and some water. I would barely take that in. And then after the race, I would feel horrible. So then I decided, well, it's my breakfast. I just can't eat breakfast on race day. My body's just not designed for that. So then I started skipping breakfast. Well, that made things even worse. I went from cramping and upset stomach to just really low energy availability, which I did not really understand what that was at the time. But essentially, I was not giving my body any fuel. I'd have dinner the night before, maybe 7 or 8 p.m., 6 p.m., and then race at noon the following day. So I'd basically fast for 18 hours, which is not good for our body. I was essentially starting the race with an empty tank, no glycogen stores in my body, which essentially our body can store carbohydrates. That had all been depleted just by everyday activity. Your body uses the energy when you're sleeping to help repair and rebuild your body. The race morning, just moving around, just normal human function. I used up any stores I had ate that night before. And then maybe I had a sports drink during the morning. I probably did at that time. So I was basically starting a multi-hour race with 100 calories in my stomach. Not ideal, very hard for our body. So then we'll go ahead and fast forward here. Now we're talking like 15 years later. Went to school for exercise science, learned a lot through exercise science and then through silent sport endurance coaching and how to fuel the body. And like, wow, a light bulb went off when I was going to school for exercise science. I needed to fuel my body for success on race day. So what does that mean? That means we want to fuel our body up race morning with simple carbohydrates and low fiber. Now, what does this mean? Simple carbohydrates essentially are foods like applesauce, bananas, oatmeal, like a simple smoothie with fruits and berries, stuff like that. Really simple carbohydrates. Carbohydrates equal fuel. And our body can store about 1,000 calories of carbohydrates through our liver and our muscle glycogen. So race morning, we want to get those simple carbohydrates in to help top off our system and get us ready for racing. Now, just like a lot of other things we do in life, it's a build up to the moment. So the food we eat in the days leading up can also help us come into race day fueled, but we're specifically talking about race day breakfast here. So yeah, we want those simple carbohydrates. And we want to stay away from fiber. Fiber essentially really good for us day in, day out for our body. But what it does do is it creates us needing to go to the bathroom. That fiber, that's something that we need to pass through our digestive tract. And we don't want that race day because we ideally want an empty stomach, but a fueled body when we race. And fiber is going to kind of slow things down a little bit and have us going to the bathroom. And we all know race day nerves. I'm sure many of us have got them. We definitely don't want to spend much time in the porta potty if we have to before we race. So we're looking for simple carbs, staying away from fiber. Now, I mentioned before, when way back in the day for me, I was having uh, fats, carbohydrates, and protein, but I really didn't need protein or fat. And that's still true to what we need today. A little bit of protein is okay, a little bit of fat is okay, but we want to stay away from those race morning because they're slow to digest and we don't need them to have us fueled for racing. Just like fiber, day in, day out, super important, very good for our body, making sure we're eating appropriate portions of fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. But race morning, stay away from fats, stay away from protein. A little bit is okay. So for example, for me, I'll have a little bit of peanut butter or a tiny bit of nuts or a little bit of chia seed or a little bit of protein powder with my race day breakfast, but only a small amount. And I'm doing that just to help curb my appetite because for actually how our body fuels or uses fuel when we're racing, we don't need any of that. Our body, no matter how little of a racer you may be or have seen, they still have about 24 hours of fat stores in our body. So we don't really need to stock up on fat. Our body already has an abundant supply of that. So we want to stock up on carbohydrates, fill our body up, and then our body will supplement with fat, and it uses those two mixes of fuel when we race. So like a two-stroke dirt bike, we've got gas and premix, same deal with carbohydrates and fats. It's a mix of the two for our body to be able to have good, proper energy for endurance racing. And this is, don't forget, endurance means any type of distance of racing, sprint, enduro, motocross, all the way up to GNCC, hare scramble, enduro to 24-hour events. Those are all considered endurance events, the way our body uses fuel. So making sure you're having that simple carbohydrate breakfast, keep it low on the fats, keep it low on the protein, definitely stay away from heavy stuff, and it's going to have you fueled up and feeling good when you start to race. Now, what about that timing of breakfast? How big should it be? When should I have it? Now, this is kind of dependent on the type of racer you are, the type of racing you're doing. But to put it in really simple terms, the longer the race, the earlier and bigger of a breakfast we want to eat. So if you're doing, for example, a GNCC hare scramble, maybe you want to eat 3+ hours before and have a really big breakfast because we really want to top off those stores because we're going to go through all those stores and then more with supplementing fuel while we're racing. Now, maybe something a little shorter, motocross, sprint, enduro. We could have that breakfast closer to the race, and it doesn't need to be as big. But it's important to remember, especially with motocross, this can be really dependent on how many classes you're racing. If it's a straight program and you're racing multiple classes, well, we definitely need more fuel than a split program where we're just racing AM or PM and one class. So that's also something you want to consider in terms of timing and size of that breakfast. So super simple. I gave a couple suggestions there of that, oatmeal, banana, some type of simple fruit, smoothie, applesauce. That's kind of like that kind of ideal makeup. There's lots of suggestions that I have there, but those are like really good go-tos. And yeah, if it's a longer race, have that breakfast sooner. So it's able to have that breakfast earlier and a little bit bigger. So that bigger breakfast is going to need more time to digest. So that's why we have it earlier, more time for the fuel to get to our muscles. Anything that does need to go through our digestive tract, we're able to get rid of. Then if it's a shorter race, you can have it closer to because you're not eating as big of a breakfast. Now, with this, it doesn't matter what type of racing we're doing. I'm always big on nothing new on race day. So when you're thinking about this breakfast, trying to come up with a plan of what you're going to eat and when you're going to eat it, do it on days you ride. Do it on days that you train off the bike. Start practicing that breakfast. Make it part of your normal routine. Everyone is different. I can say this as an endurance coach of over a decade. If I gave 5 athletes the same breakfast, sure enough, 2 or 3 of them, it's going to fail. It's not going to work because we're all different. We all have a little bit different physiology. We all have different things we like. So you need to find a breakfast that's right for you, the right amount of things. Some athletes need a little bit more protein or a little bit more fat because they get hungrier sooner. Some athletes don't need as much. Some have a really nervous stomach and need to eat way in advance, even more than what I would suggest, where some can cut it a little bit closer. So start practicing that on days you ride, on days you're training off the bike. Have that breakfast, figure out what works for you. So then race morning is just like clockwork. Your body knows exactly what to expect, when to expect it. You know what your body's going to do when you give it to it. And then it's going to make race day more predictable, which is what we want above all. Predictable race day and feeling good. So above all, if you've had a problem eating breakfast on race day, or you found that you have a really nervous stomach and have a hard time getting things down, or you haven't been eating breakfast, start implementing it, start working on it, because I can for sure promise that you will be feeling better. Don't be like me a long time ago and make yourself suffer more than you have to. Leave the suffering on the racing side, not on your stomach side and not having enough fuel. Make sure that the suffering happens because you're able to push it, not because you're having to hang on for dear life because you're so beat. So start working on that breakfast if you haven't, and it will make a big difference. Now, next week, we are going to talk about warm-up routine, why we want to warm up before we race. Just like I said with our breakfast, we want to make sure tried and true and our body's fueled up. Well, race morning, we want to also have our body warmed up. We don't just press start on our bike and hold it tapped. Our body's the same way. We've got to warm up our body just like we warm up our bike to ensure that we can have a successful, fast, and safe race. So if you want to try Mosto Fitness for free, send me a message on Instagram. We'll hook you up with a week of our single jump training program. I'll see you guys next week.